My name is Wendy and I'm 33. After my car accident, my parents refused to take my 6-week-old baby, and that sentence still lands in my chest like broken glass every time. I say it out loud. I remember the smell of burnt rubber and rain on asphalt, the sound of metal folding into itself, and the way my phone skidded across the floorboard when the airbag exploded. I woke up in the hospital with a collar around my neck, my left arm numb, and one thought louder than the monitors: my baby. 6 weeks old, still smelling like milk and warm blankets, still waking every 2 hours, still needing me for everything. I called my parents first, because that's what you do when you're hurt and scared and you believe family means help. I told them there had been an accident, that I was stable but admitted that I needed someone to take my baby for a few days until I could stand without the room spinning. The silence on the other end stretched until my mother cleared her throat and said they couldn't. She said it calmly, like she was canceling lunch. She said, "Your sister never has these emergencies." Didn't even understand the sentence at first. Emergencies aren't a personality flaw. They're accidents. They're life. I asked what my sister had to do with anything, and my father cut in to say they had plans, and that plans mattered. Later, I would learn the full sentence I'd replay in my head like a curse. She had a Caribbean cruise, as if turquoise water could outweigh a newborn's needs, as if a tan was heavier than a grandchild. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny cracks, while a nurse adjusted my IV and asked if I had someone coming. I said yes because I didn't want to cry. But no one came. My parents refused to take my 6-week-old baby, and the words echoed until they became a headline in my mind. After my car accident, my parents refused to take my 6-week-old baby. I called again. I begged. I explained the bruises, the concussion, the way my hands shook when I tried to lift my phone. My mother sighed and repeated, "Your sister never has these emergencies." I asked if emergencies were something I was supposed to schedule better. My father said they'd raised their children and were done. Done. With me. With us. The nurse came back and asked if I wanted to speak to social services, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. I wasn't an unfit mother. I was an injured one. But rules don't bend for nuance. From my hospital bed, I hired care. I signed forms with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. I called agencies and listened to hold music that sounded like mockery. I arranged round-the-clock help because my baby needed feeding, changing, holding, and I couldn't do any of it safely. I did the math while the pain meds dulled the edges of my fear. $4,500 a month, 9 years of help we'd been paying into a family plan that was supposed to kick in when things went wrong. 9 years of trusting that if I needed them, they'd be there. I stopped it all. I stopped the $4,500 month. For 9 years, $486,000, because the illusion shattered. In a sterile room with fluorescent lights, I told the agency to bill me directly and not to expect a single dollar from my parents. I felt foolish for having ever believed otherwise. Every beep of the monitor felt like time ticking away, money draining, trust evaporating. I asked the nurse if I could see my baby, and when they wheeled her in, I cried into her tiny hat and promised her I would always choose her, even if it meant choosing her alone. I thought that was the end of it, a hard lesson delivered with a receipt and a scar. But life has a way of stacking moments until something finally breaks or changes. Hours later, while the sun dipped and the room turned gold, the door opened again. I expected another nurse. Instead, I heard a familiar shuffle, the sound of a cane tapping the floor, and a voice I hadn't heard in years clear its throat. Hours later, Grandpa walked in and said, and whatever he was about to say, I could feel it before he spoke. Like the air itself had shifted. Hours later, Grandpa walked in and said nothing at first, and that silence did more damage than shouting ever could. He stood at the foot of my hospital bed, his coat still on, eyes moving from my bruised face to the IV line to the bassinet where my 6-week-old baby slept, unaware of how close she'd come to being unwanted by the people who should have loved her most. My parents followed him in, stiff and defensive, already rehearsing excuses. Grandpa finally spoke, slow and steady, the way he always did when he wanted every word to land. He repeated it out loud, so there was no misunderstanding. After my car accident, my parents refused to take my 6-week-old baby. He said it like a verdict. My mother tried to interrupt, saying they had plans, saying my sister had already paid for her Caribbean cruise, saying they didn't expect things to get so dramatic. Grandpa raised his hand and the room went quiet. He looked straight at them and said, "When you became parents, you signed up for emergencies." He pointed to me. "This is an emergency." My father shifted uncomfortably and muttered that my sister never has these emergencies. And Grandpa snapped back, "That's not virtue. That's luck." He walked closer to the bassinet, peered down at my baby, and his voice softened. This child didn't ask to be born into a family that ranks vacations above blood. Then, he turned back to my parents, and his voice hardened again. He said he'd heard everything, about the refusal, about the cruise, about how I had hired care from my hospital bed and stopped the $4,500 month for 9 years, or $86,000, because trust, once broken, doesn't deserve a payment plan. My mother looked shocked, as if consequences were a foreign language. Grandpa told them he'd already called the agency. He'd already arranged to cover immediate care so I could heal without panic. And then he delivered the line that changed everything. "From this moment on, any support that goes to this child goes through me, not you." My parents protested, saying that wasn't fair. "That family decisions should be shared." Grandpa laughed, a short, humorless sound, and said fairness had left the room the moment they chose a Caribbean cruise over a newborn. He told them they could either show up consistently or step aside permanently, but there would be no more pretending. He reminded them of the times he'd stepped in for them when they were young and broke and overwhelmed, not because it was convenient, but because it was right. He said love doesn't ask if the timing works. Love shows up. My father tried one last defense, saying they'd make it up to us later. Grandpa shook his head. "Later is how people avoid now," he said. He asked them to leave so I could rest, and for the first time in my life, they listened to someone else over me. When the door closed, Grandpa pulled a chair up and took my hand. He told me I wasn't dramatic or demanding or unlucky. He told me I was strong for doing what needed to be done, when the people who should have helped chose not to. He said my baby would grow up knowing she was chosen, every single day. Over the next weeks, Grandpa did exactly what he said he would. He coordinated care, checked in daily, and made sure no bill went unpaid. My parents called, apologetic but vague, offering help on their terms. I kept my boundaries firm. Trust wasn't something I could hand back just because they were uncomfortable without it. Slowly I healed. The bruises faded. The fear loosened its grip. And every time I held my baby, I thought about how close we'd come to being an afterthought, and how one person's courage had changed our entire future. My parents eventually realized that access to us wasn't automatic. It was earned. Some days they showed up better. Some days they didn't. But the rules were clear now, and clarity is a kind of peace. Grandpa never asked for thanks. He just smiled and said he'd done what family does. If this story moved you, if you believe that love is action and boundaries are strength, subscribe to the channel for more real stories about standing up, choosing yourself, and finding justice when it matters most.